You stand in Westminster, 1337. Tonight, the bedding ritual will judge you under canon law. This is not a dance. Your choice decides whether war begins and many die. The corridor roars with orders. Hot tallow burns your nose. Cold stone bites your feet. If you fail, the treaty cracks and debts call in. If you resist, they drag you back. Failure brings fines and war. The door is barred from the outside. The steward counted witnesses. They will hear when the bed takes weight. They will swear at dawn. The notary left a blank line for the hour. The priest said made and known. He looked at you when he said it. Your hands shake. You make them stop. By dawn, proof must exist. The sheets scratch. The mattress sags. 2 candles spit. The cup of spiced wine is warm. You drink and cough. Your maid smooths the coverlet, then the pillows. She slides a folded linen higher on the bed. She hid a small packet beneath it. A flash of red thread. You look away. The midwife came earlier with a leather pouch. It rattled. She set it on the chest and said nothing. What is in the packet? Your mother gripped your fingers. Smile in the morning, she said. She named the dowry, plate, cloth, lands. She named penalties if heirs do not come. 2 years for an heir. A son preferred. The terms sit like iron in your stomach. You are 14. You nod because everyone watches. The corridor goes quiet and waits. Laughter leaked through the keyhole at supper, then died. The steward cut a singer mid-verse. The priest sprinkled the bed and marked the posts. Boys carried you both from the hall and left you here. The lock turned. The room shrank. You stand beside the bed and count your breaths. For bars on the window. You touch the glass. It is cold. They will not take later for an answer. Boots scrape the rushes outside. A key scratches metal. Your hairpins ache. You pull too. Your scalp throbs. You rub your wrists. You stop because you hear the steward. He says the hour. The priest answers. Your maid drops her eyes. She moves the folded linen again. The packet lies closer to your reach. One stain can silence 100 mouths. The latch tests once, then settles. Men talk low. You do not catch words. Wind creeps through the leaded glass. Your fingers go numb. You flex them. You take another sip of wine. You swallow hard. He is at the door. The bride was 14. She was a minor. The match was policy, not courtship. Her father needed allies. Her groom needed money. The council weighed names like coin. A physician examined the girl. He noted clear skin and strong teeth. He wrote that she could bear children. He did not write fear. Records do not hold fear. Customs claim to protect, then press. Canon law set the age, 12 to marry for girls, 14 for boys. Great houses often delayed consummation. Some waited years. Others did not wait. This night would not wait. The bishop's license had come. The notary copied it. The seal shone in the hall. The treaty clause tied lands to heirs. Every head in the household knew the schedule. The clock is a marked candle. In the afternoon, the women led her to the bed. They sang and teased. Older matrons checked the sheets. A midwife watched in silence. The steward chose men to stand at the door. Not inside. Near. Enough to swear the couple lay together and the bed received them. Enough to hold a court if anyone later denied it. Witnesses are ready to swear. Back to the chamber. The maid tightens the coverlet. She whispers, drink. You drink. The key turns once. Iron grates. The steward murmurs a prayer. The priest answers. The handle lifts. The latch rises. The latch rose. The groom stepped in with the steward and 2 groomsmen. The priest kept to the threshold. The maid and midwife bowed and moved to the wall. The groom smelled of wine and horse. His jaw was tight. He glanced once at the bed, then at the witnesses near the door. The steward nodded. The right had a path. They would walk it. Eyes pressed from the corridor. The priest spoke the short blessing for the bedding. He named the couple by their baptismal names. He asked God to make fruitful and keep chaste from sin. The words were standard. The tone was not. The priest's gaze never left the groom's face. The steward placed a hand on the groom's shoulder and guided him forward. The groomsmen laughed too loudly, then hushed. Laughter covers fear, then fails. The maid pulled back the coverlet. The midwife checked the sheets one last time. She smoothed a crease and tugged the pillow straight. The folded linen lay high on the bed. The packet stayed hidden under it. The bride climbed in first and sat rigid. The groom removed his belt and boots. He laid his dagger on the chest. He did not touch the cup. One movement can start the clock. The witnesses did not enter. They stood with the door open and heads turned aside. They watched shadows and listened for weight. The steward called the hour from the marked candle. He would write it down after. The priest said, "Lie together in peace." He made the sign and backed into the hall. The groomsmen shouted coarse blessings and withdrew. The door shut. The bar dropped. Silence counts louder than vows. For a few breaths, neither spoke. The bed creaked as the groom sat. He kept a hand to his ribs. He winced. The bride watched his hand, then the dagger on the chest. He said, "They want it done." She nodded. He added lower, "You are 14. They do not care." She looked at the folded linen and then away. He stared at the ceiling and breathed through his nose. Time moved like a marked candle. He tried for a jest and failed. He said he had drunk too early. He said the steward would listen at intervals. He said they needed sound and a still morning. He did not reach for her. He reached for the cup and drank. He set it down hard. "Consent makes marriage," he muttered, Latin half remembered. He knew canon law enough to quote. He also knew the clause that fixed land to heirs. Words cannot soften a deadline. 3 months earlier, his counsel promised payment to his creditors when the dowry arrived. 2 castles would secure the bond. A shipment of wool stood pledged for spring. If the match failed, the fines returned and wolves circled. The chronicle listed his arrears. It noted a levy owed to the king. He could not afford a rumor of impotence or refusal. Neither could she. Reputation is a tax you pay forever. He showed the bruise at his ribs where a tilt went wrong last week. The physician had pressed the spot and warned him. The pain would pass. The steward knew and did not care. The hour stood. The bar on the door stood. The groom said, "We must at least lie close." He reached and touched her sleeve. His hand shook. She did not pull away. Neighbors judge what they cannot see. Outside, the corridor shifted. A foot scraped. A throat cleared. Someone whispered a lewd question and received a slap. The steward spoke once, quiet. The house held its breath. The bride leaned back on the pillow. The groom eased down and kept his weight on the unbruised side. The bed creaked again. He whispered, "If we wait, they will force us." Waiting invites a worse hand. The maid had placed the cup within reach. The bride took it and drank. The spice burned. She set it down. Her hand hovered over the folded linen. The packet pressed a small ridge under the cloth. She knew its shape by now. The midwife had let her feel it in the afternoon. A sharp object. A scrap of red-dyed wool. Nothing more. One secret waits under linen. The groom turned his face toward hers. He spoke a name under his breath. Not hers. She heard it clearly and said nothing. It was a woman's name. Short. Familiar to him. Not listed in the contracts. Not declared in the church porch. He flinched when he realized he had said it aloud. He shut his eyes. What promise did he make before this bed? He opened them again and forced a smile. "Forgive me," he said. "I will be quick." He reached for her hand. She let him hold it. The corridor quieted further. The steward would listen for proof. The priest would write it down. The treaty would stand or fall on a sheet and a rumor's edge. The bed shifted under their weight. The packet waited. The name hung in the air. The bar stayed down. The groom moved his hand to the ties of his shirt. The key scraped softly in the lock. The key scraped, but the bar held. A test only. The groom's fingers paused at his shirt ties. He breathed once, twice. The bride lay still. The room pressed in with heat from the candles and cold from the window glass. He reached again and stopped. Silence becomes its own witness. He spoke first. "They need sound," he said. Then a sheet. He sounded sober now. The bruise at his ribs made his breath short. He winced when the bed moved. The bride's hand hovered near the folded linen. The packet raised a small ridge. The steward coughed in the corridor. The maid came near the pillow and whispered, "You have wine. Drink." She looked at the bride's hand and then at the packet. She did not touch it. The midwife watched from the wall, hands folded. The groom reached for the cup and drank. He set it down and closed his eyes. Time stacked on the marked candle. 3 summers before, a city court fined a bride who tore the sheet before the bedding. The Chronicle recorded it. Proof mattered. Inns sold new linen for wedding nights for that reason. Households kept a chest just for bridal cloths. In some places, a washed sheet hung from a window at dawn. Here, witnesses would inspect in private. They expected one thing. Expectations can trap a house. The bride slid the folded linen aside with 2 fingers. The packet showed for a heartbeat. She slipped it open and looked. A sharp pin, red wool, and a small bladder knotted at one end. The bladder was thin and sticky where it had dried. The midwife had filled it at dusk from a butcher's pan. The maid had carried it under her apron. The bride pushed the packet closed. The secret was simple and risky. The groom watched her hands. He said nothing. He looked at the door and then back at her face. "They want noise," he said. Then a mark. He swallowed. "We can make both." He reached for her wrist and stopped short. He withdrew his hand and looked at the dagger on the chest. The corridor shifted and hushed again. He tried to stand and failed. The bruise fired and he sank back. He cursed under his breath. Then he said it again, that other name, soft and unsteady. The bride heard it and held herself still. The maid's eyes flicked to the groom and then down. The midwife closed her eyes a moment and opened them. Some names cut like grits. The maid whispered, "I prick your thumb." We press the cloth. We breathe loud. It ends. The midwife's mouth tightened, but she did not protest. She had carried the pouch. She had seen sheets become shields. The bride did not answer. She looked at the groom. His jaw worked. He stared at the ceiling. "You can end this in one motion." Outside, the steward called the half hour from the candle. He would write it at dawn beside 2 signatures. The priest's murmur answered from the corridor. The groomsmen had gone to dice in the buttery. The house held the quiet like a taut string. The plan was there on the bed. The groom whispered, "I am not drunk now." He fixed his eyes on the bride's face. "If I lie with you, this stands forever. Ratified. Consummated. No retreat." He knew the canon words. Ratified but not consummated could be loosed by Rome in rare cases. Consummated could not. He swallowed. "I must tell you before we do this. Clocks and consciences do not keep the same time." He leaned close and kept his voice low. "Last winter," he said, "I spoke vows to another. Before witnesses. Not betrothal for later. I said I take you now. We were foolish." He named the woman. The same name he had slipped earlier. "Agnes," he said, "the Reeves' daughter. We swore de presenti. I sent for counsel. The letter to Rome is not answered." The central secret stood between them. The bride stared at him. The maid went pale and clutched the packet. The midwife whispered, "God save us." A pre-contract of present words made a marriage in law. If true, this union here was voidable. If exposed, the treaty broke. The dowry returned. Creditors pressed. Neighbors laughed. War could start at the border. Truth could wreck a realm. The groom kept speaking fast and low. "No one knows except 3 in the village and a priest who is now dead." He swallowed again. "I meant to end it by dispensation. My uncle wrote to the bishop. The seal has not come. If we do this now, we burn the path back. If we do not, they will force us and still call it done. 2 doors and both dangerous." The maid raised the pin. Her voice shook. "We can make the sheet," she said. "They will not know." The midwife moved closer and set her hand on the bride's shoulder. The bride felt the weight and heat of that hand. She looked at the bladder, the red wool, the pinpoint catching candlelight. A choice can be loud without a sound. The groom shut his eyes. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have told before the church." He opened them and waited. His hand trembled on the coverlet. Outside, a footstep halted by the door. The steward's voice came low. "The hour passes." The bride lifted her hand over the linen. The packet lay open. The pin hovered. The groom's confession hung in the air. The bar on the door did not move. The bride lowered her hand. She looked at the packet and then at the groom. He had said the words, a pre-contract, present tense, de presenti. She heard the corridor breathe. Someone listens at the door. She spoke first. We will not consummate, she said. Not tonight. The midwife stiffened. The maid nodded once. The groom closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. Then we must make proof, the maid said, or they will break the door. The bride slid the folded linen closer. The bladder stuck to the cloth. The pin lay ready. Time narrows to the marked candle. The midwife warned them. This risks perjury, she said. Church courts press hard when sheets lie. But she also knew the customs. In England, after Lateran IV, consent made marriage. Bans warned neighbors. Dispensations healed kin ties. Pre-contracts stood when proved by witnesses. Consummation fixed the bond so Rome could not loose it. They all knew that last point. Law weighs more than whispers. Outside, the steward called the hour again. The priest answered. A laugh broke and died. The groom lifted his hand and took the bride's wrist. I am sorry, he said. I should have told you before the porch. She pulled her wrist free, then placed it back in his hand. We keep the realm quiet, she said. Then we write to Rome. The house waits for a sound. The maid pricked the bride's thumb. A bright bead rose. The bride pressed it to the linen and drew a short line. The midwife opened the bladder with her nail and let a thin thread fall onto the sheet. She dabbed it with red wool until the edges thinned. She set the bladder aside. The smell was raw and faint. The bride's throat tightened, but she did not gag. Noise must follow proof. The bed creaked as the groom shifted. He kept his weight on the unbruised side. He whispered a prayer. The bride answered with one word, Amen. The maid leaned close. Breathe, she said. Move the ropes. Let them hear. The groom tugged the bedcord once. The frame thumped. The bride forced out a small cry. The midwife winced, but did not stop them. The corridor went still. The steward spoke through the wood. Be quick, he said. The company expects tokens in the morning. He paused. Is all lawful? The groom answered, lawful. The priest added a blessing and moved away. The maid shook the coverlet so it rustled. The midwife folded the treated corner under, leaving the surface smooth. One lie now prevents 10 later. The groom leaned near the bride's ear. If Rome refuses me, he said, I swear to set Agnes aside and make a life here. The bride stared at the ceiling. If Rome refuses you, she said, it will be because this bed was done. Do not speak her name again. He bit his lip and nodded. He did not say the name. Some truths and futures. 3 months earlier, a shire court had heard a case like this. A man claimed a pre-contract to void a lord's match. The court sent it to the bishop. The bishop asked 2 questions. Were there present tense vows before witnesses? Was there carnal union after the new wedding? A yes to the second shut the door. Chroniclers recorded such suits with dry notes and heavy costs. Precedent points one way. Back to the chamber. The maid lifted the cup to the bride. Drink, she said. The spice burned. The bride set the cup down. The midwife checked the sheet again. The color had set. It looked messy but not staged. She nodded. Now quiet, she said. Let the house sleep. The groom shifted and hissed at the pain in his ribs. He pulled the coverlet to his shoulder. Dawn will ask for proof. Steps halted outside. The steward spoke again. At first light, he said, the matrons will view the linen. The notary will record. The seal waits. The words crawled under the door. The bride's hands went cold. The maid swallowed and whispered, it will hold. The midwife did not answer. She wiped the pin and slipped it into her sleeve. Morning can break plans. The priest moved away. Dice clicked in the buttery. The marked candle sank. The groom laid his hand on the bride's sleeve and left it there. He did not move closer. The bride kept her eyes open and fixed on the canopy boards. The house settled into uneven sleep. The sheet under her wrist felt damp and heavy. The bar scraped on the far side. It stopped. Then it lifted a finger's width. The bar lifted another finger's width. Wood rasped. Iron clicked. The groom sat up fast and winced. The bruise fired. The bride caught the coverlet to keep the sheet smooth. The maid slid the empty bladder deep under the pillow. The midwife fixed her eyes on the latch. Someone grips the bar. "Hold," the steward said through the door. "All is lawful?" His breath steamed against the wood. The priest stood with him. "Answer," the steward said. "We must report to the hall." The groom took one breath and found his voice. "Lawful," he said. "We lie together." The words ran dry in his mouth. The bride set her hand over his and pressed once. A single answer changes everything. The midwife moved to the headboard and tugged the bedcord once. The frame thumped. The maid fluttered the coverlet so fabric hissed. The bride let out a short sound and clamped her jaw. The groom swallowed a curse at the pain and breathed heavy. Sweat ran in a line behind his ear. The room smelled of wine and raw iron. Noise can save a realm. A groomsman laughed in the corridor. "Louder," he said, and reached for the bar. The steward struck his hand away. "Modesty," he said, flat. The priest murmured a prayer that named chastity and fruitfulness again. He did not move from the threshold. "At dawn," the steward said, "tokens." He paused. "You, my lord, do you swear as to your strength?" Dawn moves closer with every breath. The groom's jaw set. He looked at the bride and then at the dagger on the chest. He did not reach for it. He said, "I swear." His voice shook. The steward waited, then said, "Good." The bar dropped a fraction. Boots shifted. The hall breathed again. The maid sagged against the bedpost and caught herself. The midwife lifted the sheet corner and checked the stain. It held. The sheet must pass their eyes. The groom lowered himself onto the unbruised side. He lay close, but did not press weight. He kept the bride's hand in his and counted his breaths. The bride stared at the canopy boards until the shape stopped swimming. The maid wiped the pin and slid it deeper into her sleeve. The midwife sat on the chest and listened to the corridor settle. One mistake ruins everything. The groomsman's voice came again, slurred now. "Show us the tokens now," he said. The steward snapped enough. Dice clicked in the buttery. A door thudded. The priest spoke once more through the wood. "Keep peace," he said. "Keep the bond clean." He moved away. The steward stayed. They heard his weight lean and settle beside the jam. "They are not leaving." The groom whispered, "I will keep silence." The bride said, "You will keep her name buried." He nodded. He did not speak the name. The maid lifted the cup to the bride. "Drink," she said. The spice burned again. The bride's hand steadied. The midwife pulled the folded linen higher to protect the corner with the stain. She pressed the crease flat with her thumb. "Small axe hold the line." The steward called the hour. The marked candle had sunk to the next line. He would record it at dawn. "Sleep," he said, "not unkind. The house will wake you." The words through it sounded almost human. He shifted his feet and stayed. The groomsmen shuffled away. The corridor dimmed and quieted. Silence returns, but not safety. Inside, the groom's breath slowed. He winced only when the bed moved. He kept his hand on the bride's sleeve. The bride kept her eyes open. The maid dozed on her feet and started awake. The midwife watched the door and listened for the scrape that meant the bar would rise. They must believe the morning. The candle guttered. The room cooled. Sweat dried and left salt on their lips. The bride curled her toes against the sheet to feel the cloth hold. The groom whispered a prayer he half remembered. The midwife answered with amen. The maid tucked the packet remnants deeper and wiped her hands on her apron. The next knock decides everything. Steps returned at gray light. The steward's voice came low but firm. "Rise," he said. "Matrons will view the linen." The notary waits with the seal. The priest stood behind him. The corridor filled with hushed movement. The bar lifted cleanly this time and poised. The door began to open. The steward entered with 2 matrons and the priest. The groomsmen stayed out. The notary followed with his ink and a warm stick of wax. The groom slid back and held his side. The bride kept her hand on the smooth part of the sheet. The maid stood straight. The midwife stepped aside. The house waits for a verdict. The elder matron bent to the bed. She lifted the folded linen. She saw the color in the cloth and touched the edge with 2 fingers. She sniffed once. She looked to the midwife. The midwife kept her face plain and said, "It is done." The second matron nodded. The steward watched, unreadable. "A sheet can carry a crown." The priest asked, "All lawful?" The elder matron answered, "Lawful." The steward exhaled. He turned to the notary. The notary wrote the hour beside the names. He melted wax and pressed the seal. The priest raised a brief prayer for fruitfulness and peace. The steward opened the door to the corridor and said, "Give thanks. The tokens stand. Proof today means peace tomorrow." The groomsmen cheered. The corridor answered. Footsteps hurried. The steward barred the door again and said, "Quietly rest." He looked at the groom's face and the bride's hands. He softened his voice. "Eat when you can." The priest gave a final blessing and left with the women. The room shrank back to its 4 walls and low voices. Back to the chamber. The maid sank to the chest and let out a breath. The midwife folded the linen with the marked corner inside. She tied it with a cord and handed it to the steward at the next knock. The steward took it for the chest of marriage tokens. The groom lay back and closed his eyes. The bride watched the seal cool on the notary's rack through the open door, then turned away. One secret can cost a realm. 3 hours later, the hall filled with bread and ale. Musicians rubbed sleep from their faces and tuned. The notary read the record again at the high table. Gifts changed hands. The chronicle would note the feast, not the pause at the door. The bride sat beside the groom and kept her back straight. He smiled when spoken to and did not drink hard. The steward glanced often at the couple and then at the border map rolled by the dais. By noon, the messengers rode. The groom called his chamberlain. He dictated letters for the bishop and for Rome. He asked for judgment on a pre-contract in the village, named only in initials. He ordered coin for the reeve and 2 witnesses there. He sent a priest of his own to hear confessions and ask careful questions. The bride listened and said, "Move fast." Rome writes slow. Rumor moves fast. By evening, the maid burned the empty pouch in the kitchen fire. The midwife washed her hands with vinegar and salt. She spoke to the bride in private. "Send for me if anyone asks," she said. "I will answer." The bride thanked her and gave her a small purse. The groom rested his side and drafted more names for the bishop's court. Back to the chamber again. 3 days later, the Matrons stored the sheet in the household chest. The notary sealed the record and copied it once. The steward set new rules for the door at night. The priest began prayers for heirs each Sunday. The groom stopped saying the other name. The bride watched the candle lines and learned each mark. War did not start that week. 3 months later, the first letter returned from the bishop. He asked for sworn depositions from the village. The priest there had died. The groom's messenger wrote that 2 witnesses remembered a promise, but not the exact words. The bishop's clerk wanted more. The groom paid for more travel. The bride approved the expense. Peace needs constant work. You stand by the bed at dawn. The glass shows a plain, gray sky. The seal cools. The hall cheers. You kept the house for more for now. You learn that a sheet can outweigh a vow. If you want more nights told as they were, stay with the story.